Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to our next week of the weekly team training and inspiration call. This week we have Jessica Jackson with us, and I'm excited to have her talk with us about content creation and just storytelling. And she's somebody that I feel has gotten really good at telling stories that relate to her audience and providing content that is relatable and touches on a lot of the things I'm going to talk about in a minute, and she's going to talk about too, about putting out content that is relevant for who you're speaking to, it's relatable for who you're speaking to, builds trust with them and builds connection with them. And I know that a couple weeks ago we had Cassie on here talking a little bit about social media presence and the actual things to do to make sure you're present in different areas, like in your stories and on your feed and in your inbox, and things to be saying, and kind of like how to find your network and all. And that's a little bit, that's important, but it's a little bit different than what we're going to talk about today, which is actually like producing content and content creation and what to say in your content and tips for that to be as effective as possible. So we touched on it a little bit a couple weeks ago, but now we're going to really get into some more like tangible tips of how you can use these tools and ideas to physically write content. And so that's what I'm excited about, because it's important for us to be creating novel content and custom content all the time. We get it a little bit stuck in the copy and paste mentality, which is great if you're sharing someone's testimony, but not if you're trying to share a story that's supposed to be relatable to your audience, because it's something that might not hit exactly the way you want it to, because it might have not have been written by you. And obviously we suggest tweaking anything that you see if you're borrowing it from someone and using it as your own. And we all encourage sharing of content and all of that, but I think it's important to understand how to adjust things if you need to, and maybe have some inspiration for writing your own content. And I think that we need to think of our content less like an advertisement for ourselves. You know what I mean? Like, not like, hey, look at me, be my friend. Like, that's not what it's about. I think we need to think of our content as a conversation with the people in our network, and human to human, not one to many, right? You're not trying to be a broadcaster. You're trying to be an individual having a conversation and making a connection with somebody. And so I'm going to go over some of my tips, and then Jessica is going to give you some great inspiration and ideas for actually creating that content for exactly the person you need to be speaking to and writing your content for social media. So I always want us to remember that stories are powerful. And stories don't have to be big, long stories. They don't have to be intense stories. Stories are just writing in a way that takes someone on a little bit of a journey, right? There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it doesn't have to be something really long. It doesn't have to be this huge story about your life. It doesn't have to be like that. It's just a writing style that has like a starting and then the meaty middle and a closing, right? And I think we get caught up on the whole adding value thing. Like, we're adding value, and everyone thinks I have to teach somebody something. Like, I have to teach if I'm adding value, and that's just not true. Right now, what a lot of people value is connection and community and real conversations. And a lot of times a story is providing that. That's the value, is making them feel some type of way, giving them that sense of connection and serving them in a way that's making them feel like they have a sense of community and trust in you. And maybe they're learning something about you, not necessarily learning a new skill or something, right? So we don't always have to be teaching. I think that's important. And I want us to remember the things that are important to include in your stories and in your content, and what you don't need to include. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is what I like to call above the fold. Like in a newspaper, right? They put the most important, most eye-catching articles on the top above the fold, where they fold up the newspaper and you see the front half, right? There's a reason why they put those things there, because that's what's going to grab people's attention. That is what was going to make people want to buy the newspaper. This is like your email headline, right? The email subject line, right? That's what's going to make you want to open it. You see when you see a little preview of your email in your inbox, you see the subject line, and then you see the next little 2 lines, right? Of maybe like a summary of the content. So your posts have that too. Every single time you post something on social media, the person's seeing probably 2 to 3 lines in the very beginning. On Instagram, it's even less. It's like a sentence, and then it says you have a button to expand it. On Facebook, you get like 2 or 3 sentences. So you get a little more space. But the point is to notice that those first and second lines are probably the most important of all of your content. And I remember when I was in college learning about advertising and public relations and marketing, and that's what I went to school for. The way you would write content is to basically put the most important information first. You want to talk about the main subject of your content. You want to talk about what you're going to learn, what you're going to present, all that stuff. Like, they want to get an idea of what you're talking about in the first few lines. And so if you start telling a story or talking about something that's kind of dragging on, or the first person reads the first two sentences and it's like, yesterday I went to the store and I really wanted to find some apples, and right, it's like, why would they want to read that, right? But if you started your story with something like, I cannot believe I got such a great deal today, right? Like, they don't know, they're like, ooh, sense of mystery. Like, I'm going to expand. So you're talking about, like, so there's a way to write it that it makes people want to click to see more, instead of this like boring story that's kind of leading in, starting slow, whatever, right? So remember that the content that's above the fold needs to be eye-catching, interaction producing, like and I count interacting as clicking to see more. That's them interacting with your content, right? You want to make people curious about what you're talking about, interested in what you're talking about. Maybe it's something to make them laugh. Maybe it's something to make them smile. Maybe it's something silly to make them relate to you. Maybe it's something that you went through that they have a similar experience. Whatever that is, remember whatever that meaty part is of what your content is going to be, and put a piece of that in the first couple of lines so they get an idea of that. Because if you start out with kind of a rambly sentence, they don't understand what you're talking about, and they're probably not going to click to open it. So that's important. And then a little kind of insert I want to just put in there is, if you're using emojis, I love them in a subject line because they can kind of amplify what you're saying, but don't overuse them because they take up a lot of space, especially in the top lines. So that's precious. That is precious headline space, okay? So if you are talking about how crazy your kids are being in the first couple of lines, maybe don't stick like 4 emojis on there about the crazy things your kids are doing, right? Maybe just like the crazy face emoji or something. So just remember that, like, don't overuse emojis, but use them to amplify your content. And that goes for anywhere in your content too. I mean, they're good as an embellishment to amplify, to add emphasis, all of that. But if they're distracting from your content, you want to make sure that you're not including too many of them. But I do think emojis make your content more engaging and more eye-catching. And it's kind of fun to see the emojis that people use. So that's something that a lot of people are including in their content because it's important. It's part of our texting culture. It's part of our social media culture. It's part of our content culture now. Emojis are a huge thing. And so I think that they're important to include, but not to overuse. So the next thing is what I have run into a lot with people telling me that it's hard for them to create their own content because they don't feel like they're a good writer. They don't feel like they know what to say. They don't feel like they're good at coming up with social media posts, right? And the thing is, nobody is naturally good at writing social media content, right? We've all learned how to do it. And the more you write content, the more you will get good at it. And so that's why being consistent is so important, because the more you do it, the more it becomes habit, the more you learn how to write good posts, the more you learn what performs well and what doesn't. You learn what your audience wants to hear or see, and you learn maybe what they don't respond to so much. And so I think it's important to keep trying to write your own content and try to put out a piece of original content. I mean, hopefully every day or every couple days, you're putting out some kind of original content. And it doesn't need to be anything earth-shattering or groundbreaking. The point is for it to be relatable. So one of the things that I'm pretty passionate about because of my background in public relations and advertising is formatting. And most people don't know this. And so that's why I'm a little bit excited to talk about it, because it's something that on social media, a lot of us get used to just like writing a blurb of information, right? It's like this giant paragraph and it's all in one thing. And that's great. And it can tell a great story, and that's fine if it's really short and concise, then go for it. But as somebody who comes from a little bit of a copywriting background, it's hard for someone to read something that maybe doesn't have good flow or isn't broken up appropriately, or if some punctuation is funky, or if it's hard to read, right? Because it's not segmented properly or whatever. Not that you need to be like a master in literature, but if you have something that should be 3 or 4 paragraphs in one big long chunk, as soon as someone clicks to see more, they're going to see this giant chunk of text, this flood of text, right? And it's like, whoa, they just got like like where did they leave off? Where, I don't even know. Like, where does it start? Where does it end? You know, it looks really long and it's like scroll, 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 and it's super long, right? So that like bugs me when I see that, but I know a lot of people don't know that. They just write and they're writing content and it's great. Like it's awesome material. So that's why I want to share that with you a little bit, how to just kind of like format something so that it's easier to read and more inviting to read. That's another way I really like to use emojis. You'll notice I use them as line breaks a lot, either before or at the end of my content. I do that all the time because not only does it give someone an idea of what that segment is about, it also emphasizes it, it amplifies it, it adds in a little fun, but it's also a way for them to keep track of where they are in my content, right? So if they are kind of scrolling or if they're reading, you know, looking up and down or something, if their kids are running around, they have to look back to it, you know what I mean? Like we all are all the time. It's kind of a placeholder too. It's like a benchmarker. So I like to use both line breaks and emojis as markers for separating my content. Remember to separate different ideas into different paragraphs. This is like back to like probably like writing 101, but I think that we've gotten into really heavy like texting culture and instant messaging culture where we just kind of send a whole idea, like a whole chunk of text in one big blob. And we need to remember that when we're presenting content, it's kind of like presenting an article or something in on a publication, right? It needs to be kind of like ideas need to be separated so people can follow what you're saying. And so read it through, make sure that you read through your content. And if you have some type of line break that needs to happen, or if punctuation needs to happen, or remember that your emotion and your emphasis and all of that cannot be communicated in simple text. So however you need to add some commas, add some exclamation points, add some, you know, ... if it's like, you know, this thought that you're kind of letting linger or whatever, right? Or like separate some lines if you're moving from one thought to a next, or one place to a next, or one idea to the next, you need to have a paragraph break, all that. So like remember those things when you're reading through, that even if you are almost in your head, like reading it in your own language, like in your own voice, and you know exactly what your emotions sound like, right? But somebody else doesn't. When they read it, they don't know where your line breaks are. They don't know where you're putting emphasis. They don't know when you're really excited about something. I'm all about throwing in a word of all caps in there. Like that's important. Now, 17 words of all caps in one paragraph? No, then you look like you're screaming at people. Don't do that. But if it's like, okay, I want to really put emphasis behind this, then remember to add that an exclamation point. And, you know, so just remember, notice your, the inflection of your voice if you were to read this out loud. Now, what can you, in your content, reflect that emotion or that emphasis or that feeling, right? And if you're pausing to take a breath and moving to a new subject or a new topic or whatever, make sure you're separating those paragraphs so people understand that that's like a new idea, right? So, because it's hard to follow. It can be hard to follow if you add all these ideas bunched up into like one paragraph. So that can be difficult. And try to avoid the run-on sentences. I was guilty of this for a long time because I love like long wordy sentences because I like to say a lot. I like to say a lot of things in my content, and I've learned to edit. And it's important to avoid the whole notion that you have to like say everything with every sentence. Like that you can have clear, concise, short sentences. You don't have, like if you're telling your plexus story, it doesn't have to be like, I used to have the worst headaches and I felt run down every day. And when I woke up with my kids, I had no energy to help them and they were running wild, blah, blah, blah. And like, that could be one huge sentence, but like, hey, just like shorten it and say, I remember when I used to be exhausted, period. Line break. My kids would wake me up every day and I didn't have the energy to play with them, period. You know, maybe like exhausted emoji, right? So it can be so much more powerful than a big run-on sentence that's hard for people to follow, if that makes sense. So read it back over, and wherever you are pausing, you are stopping, then make sure to add punctuation there or line breaks when appropriate or emojis when appropriate, like that. Because one or two sentences, if they're run-on sentences, they can become like a whole paragraph's worth of text. And if you aren't breaking it up, then you've got your next couple sentences that can be run-on sentences. And pretty soon you've got scroll, one big paragraph that's hard to follow, right? So just see where you can kind of make things concise and turn them into one short sentence instead of making them a long run-on sentence. And if you're getting tired of reading your own post? People probably are too. So if you read back through your post and you're already like bored of reading it after you read a couple sentences, and it probably means you need to edit it. So I know sometimes you don't like to like read back over our own content, but you should, and you should read it out loud. Okay, so my last like handful of tips, just about formatting, because it's somewhere that I'm really passionate. You don't have to be like a grammar wizard or this literacy master. I am definitely not, but it's an area that I have studied and I have worked in, and I've learned a bit. So I'm just trying to share my like simple tips for everybody to write better content. Okay, number one, obviously spell check. Please spell check. And I know that everyone like doesn't want to hear this, but if you're using incorrect versions of words like there, and there, or your and your, you might not care about the piece of that, the grammar piece of that, or the correctness of that. But there are people out there that do, and they notice the difference. And so if you're using the wrong contraction for something, if you're trying to say you are, it should be you apostrophe RE, not YOUR. Like that stuff, I know the difference. And so when I see that, I'm just like, oh no, like that's wrong. Like stop, fix it, you know, like, but you might not, and that's great. And there's tons of people out there that don't care, but there's a lot of people that do. And it's a really simple tweak, right? So it's really basic. And so it's something to just kind of get used to, like knowing the difference of, but not just something that's like that, but using like contractions when appropriate, I think. And maybe if you're trying to have more casual language, then use contractions. If you're having more formal language, then don't use contractions, right? But if you're trying to edit and shorten your content, contractions are great. So just know the vibe that you're setting off, and there's just a few things that it's like, okay, if we're gonna write good content, you wanna make sure that it's having the biggest effect and not like turning people off, right? Like that's the whole point, right? So next is edit and restructure. So if you're someone who's long-winded, awesome, because I think people like good stories. And if you're in your audience enjoys that, then tell a good, nice, long story. But it's important to only include enough words needed to tell the story. So we want to avoid the filler words. For example, I'm really excited to go down to the river and sit in the sun or something, whatever, right? We don't need to say I'm really excited. Like just say I'm excited to go to the river. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to say I'm really excited to go down to the river. Like see how many more words that is? Sorry, that was a lame example. That's off the top of my head. But you see how it's inserting more words that are like unnecessary? It's totally giving you the same effect, but you can read the sentence again and say, okay, how can I make this shorter? Like, how can I just use less words? Because remember, when time is money, people are busy. And so even though you're trying to tell a great story, you want to say it in the least amount of words as possible. So get rid of things like really, very, just, down, and up are often unnecessary unless it's important. The direction of something is important. Like I sat down on the floor. You can just say I sat on the floor. So there's little things like that. Just reading, you can just take it out because it's an extra word you probably don't need. I'm so excited. Take out so if you don't need if you don't need it. Or just say, use a better word. Use a more descriptive word. I'm ecstatic in all caps instead of I'm so excited, right? So just make it shorter, all caps. Like you pick a better word, right? Use a thesaurus if you need to. Like I'm all about like Googling a thesaurus, or synonyms or whatever, right? And then look what you've written. I always go back and read through my content and look at how I can say something in less words. But I also go back and read through it and see how I can use more specific examples. So if I am talking about buying something at the store, what exactly am I buying? What store did I go to? Right? What are the sights and sounds and tastes and sensations, all that. Like use specific examples that are relatable to people. If you're watching Netflix at night, what are you watching? When were you watching it? Were you having a snack while you were watching it? You know, like things that people can relate to. Those are the things that people are going to catch on to, and they're going to say, oh my gosh, I watched that show too. Or, oh, I love that brand of kettle corn or whatever, right? Like label it, name it. If you went out to a restaurant and had dinner, don't just say, oh, we went out for date night, selfie, right? Where'd you go? What did you get for dinner? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? What would you do again next time? What are you waiting for to go back and get? You know, like use specific examples, because that is going to be what grabs people. Because if it doesn't have a specific description of something, it's going to be hard for people to relate to it. So that's important to remember when just talking about topics in general. Also, I think Jessica does a really good job of this now. Like, I mean, you probably always did, but I'm just noticing it because her content is like so great. But think about what you're doing with your kids. Like if you're just playing outside with your kids, what are you playing? What are you playing? Squirt guns that you got at Costco on a super killer deal for $12.99 for 3 squirt guns? Everybody go get one. You know what I mean? Like, you see how much more impactful that is than, hey, I'm outside playing with my kids. Like, it's way more descriptive, way more relatable, and more impactful and valuable content if you're giving a better description, something more specific. So the very last thing I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to let Jessica talk, is to read over your content for flow. Often what I will do is read back over my content, and I'll like take a couple sentences that I had put at the end and I'll just plop them back up at the top. Because maybe you'll end up getting to the end of your story and the big bang happens at the end. And it's like, oh wait, this should have been in the beginning because this is like the main idea. Like this is the main exciting whole deal, right? And so often I'll like take a middle or end chunk and I'll put it right back at the top and rephrase it to be more of an introduction. And so it's important to remember that because that is the stuff that comes above the fold. So read it for flow. If you're hopping from ideas, then it needs to be adjusted a little bit. Edit out unnecessary words and make sure you're having line breaks where they need to be and use emojis as best you can, but don't overuse them so they're distracting. And just try to use as many concrete examples as possible. Now, if you're like, I was laying in my, mahogany bed underneath my whatever quilts with like, blue quilt with hearts on it. Like, okay, that's like too much. Like, get over that, stop. Okay. So like, don't do that. But the point is to pick out things that are relatable to people and use concrete examples in those areas. So I'm excited for Jessica to talk about her kind of pieces of inspiration for creating and writing the actual content to put out on social media, because I gave you a lot of like formatting tips, but I think the prompts that she's going to give you are going to be really helpful in actually giving you triggers to think of what kind of content to come up with and why. So I will kind of give her the floor and let her give you her tips for generating content. Okay, go ahead, Jess.
So sorry, I am not this tan. I don't know what is with this room, but I was like, oh, wow. And I put sunscreen on, so I look very shiny. Anyway, hope you're enjoying the sunny weather if you're in Oregon.
Yeah.
So really, it's been probably only the last 2 months during this quarantine time that I started to really narrow down what my content looked like. What did I want to be about? Who am I? What do I like? Because we can get so caught up and scattered and trying to appease everybody on our feed, and then we end up just speaking to nobody. And I think if you're a seasoned ambassador, when you first started, it was we want to speak to everybody. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong because everybody does need these products, but there's someone specific that you are meant to serve, that you are meant to help, that's going to be easy to link arms with. So I started using what's called StoryBrand Framework, and it's from, I can't take credit for it, it's from Rachel Rogers. And the first step, this was like mind-blowing to me, was give your ideal client a name. So I specifically thought of someone who, like, maybe she's a potential right now. And I wrote her name down and I wrote some things about her. And what does she like? What does she want? All of the specifics about her, and started to create a post like that. You're going to want to take all of Allie's tips with this because you could go and run with it and make a post that is way too long that could be like 4 posts. So it's okay to take like one topic that your ideal client is struggling with. So if your ideal client is struggling with exhaustion, make your post about exhaustion. You don't have to include, eating right or bloat or all of that. You can just talk about that one thing. So then you're like, oh my gosh, I have 3 different things I can talk about now. I have 3 different days worth of posts. So name your ideal client, write a list of things that that person likes. Your next step is what is their outward struggle? So just like I named before, maybe it's exhaustion, maybe it's bloat, or all the things that people struggle with that that your specific person in mind struggles with. And if you don't know, you need to be going on to these people's Facebook feeds because I guarantee you they're probably sharing them. A lot of people share their struggles before they're going to ever share something that is going great in their life. So not just their outward struggle, but what is also their internal struggle, because people are going to have both. In my posts, I like to do an outward and an inward struggle kind of in one, because I want to encompass whole body. I don't want to just encompass one aspect. And I usually can hit just a couple more people if I am choosing an outward and an inward struggle. So maybe it's they're exhausted, but they also don't feel worth it. You can make those don't really go together, but you can find two topics that go together to be able to make 2 in 1. Your step 5, and I can put these on the page, the PDF that I have of this. Step 5 is, how do you empathize with that person, and how can you build the belief in them? What has happened in your life, in your struggles, that you now are in a place where things are a bit easier? How can you build belief in them that there is hope for them? Build hope for these people. Find that joy spot that they can cling to in your post. They don't want to just hear about the struggle. They want that piece that is clinging to the joy. Where's my next page? Your step 6 is, this is huge. And this, I think, is what has gotten more people attracted to my posts, is what objections do they have on the sale? So it might not always be the same client or the same potential that I'm thinking of, but what is an objection that I get? So I am targeting exercise folks. Like, that's my niche. That's where I'm well-versed. So a lot of things I get is, I don't need supplements. I'm healthy enough. I can do a blurb in there. Like in my last post, I put, this is not a diet pill. This is a gut, I don't even know what exactly I wrote, but I wrote specifically, this is not a diet pill, because I know that's what that person is thinking. So when they get to that point, they're gonna be like, oh, she just called out exactly what I was thinking. And if you're calling out what someone is thinking, they're more likely to message you. True story. Like, I am pretty floored at the number of people just from my posts now that are actually interacting, because I called out what their objection was. They said, yes, you know what you wrote is exactly what I had in my mind. Step 7 is, what plan or map to the results do you have? So on there, I said, this is not a diet pill. I had to look internally, literally at my internal gut health, to learn what was going wrong, because a diet pill isn't going to fix that. So that's a map to result. I'm going to look, I'm going to see what is going on with my health. I'm going to paint that picture of, this is going to help you. This is not just going to be a Band-Aid. And then a call to action. Like, you don't want to write just message me and DM me. And you want to say, I want to help you. I want to link arms with you. I think at the end, it's important to be able to have that inviting last sentence, so they know that you are welcoming, you want to help them, and that at the end of the day, you are here for them. So I just gave a lot of steps all in one. I think your very most important thing is, you have to know who you are meant to serve, and know that it is okay. You're not leaving anybody out by honing into what you are good at. I know that I'm good at exercise. I know I'm well-versed at exercise. And for a long, long time, I tried to hit everybody, and it wasn't working well. And I didn't feel confident. I didn't feel confident in my ability to share. And I think that's another big piece on why my posts seem different, because I have confidence in what I'm speaking about, because I'm choosing to speak about what I know. And if you don't know, don't write about it. It's okay. It's okay to not know everything. Like, I sure as heck, I'm not going to do a huge cooking thing like Allie. Allie's very good at that. And that is okay that she's good at this and I'm good at that. Don't try to be Superwoman, Superman, all in one. Another aspect, you know what you are, who you are to serve, but what are your values? Like, what do you value? There is all sorts of different things that you can search, on Google that has ideal values. Print that out, look at it, see what is it that I value, so I can integrate that into my post, because you're not going to want to attract somebody that doesn't have the same values as you. It's really hard to link arms, especially if you're someone who here is a business builder and you're wanting to create a legacy. It is harder to be able to link arms with somebody when you don't have the same values. It's okay to not agree. That is perfectly fine. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you want to align with somebody so that when you are doing business with them, you're on the same page. And you don't feel like you're butting heads, or like you're just like, this isn't working. And I know we're two great people, but this just isn't working. So know what your values are. So then you can speak to those. I think that's all I got.
Awesome.
One thing I was going to tag on to what you had said. I'm trying not to do a ton of it, but yaytext.com is how I've been changing my fonts and like italicizing, because I like to make big all caps. That's the word I'm looking for. And sometimes I do it too much. So I've been trying to do a little more of like italicized or bolding a word. And I don't do that in every post because it is very time consuming, but I do. It's yaytext.com, and you just put in the word and it'll show you different versions of it, of how you want to change up, italicize or bold it or whatever. Don't go haywire with that because it can be very distracting. But okay.
I like that. That's a good tip. I don't think I knew that. I mean,
I just barely started to, because I'd seen a couple people were doing it, and I Googled it and I was like, oh, this is a free thing you can do. So yeah, it's yaytext.com. And nice. It's changed a lot. I also have been using only one filter. I was awful with this. I'm like, what? That looks great. And sometimes some of my pictures don't look super great with that filter, but especially for my Instagram feed, if I use the same filter, it just looks a little more uniformed. And I have just gotten some more actual comments on my Instagram. And I think it's because when you go to look at it, it's like, oh, this looks a bit more uniformed. Facebook, different story.
Absolutely.
Don't worry about that with Facebook.
And I think when you start having a more effective writing style and a clearer writing style, like you were saying, yes, the subject of your content is inviting the people that are going to be similar to you, but also people know what to expect with your writing style, right? And like she mentioned my like cooking videos, right? I love to cook and I'm cooking anyway. So I might as well go live and talk about my cooking, right? Because I'm doing it anyway a few times a week. That's why I started that. And then now when I hop on, I notice instantly there's like 12 people on within 45 seconds because they know exactly what to expect. They know that I'm going to do a short recipe that's going to be like only 5 to 7 minutes long, and it's going to be quick and easy and simple. And you know what I mean? Like stuff like that. Like they know you're so predictable and so consistent. And this is what builds trust. And
yes, that's what's the trust liking factor. You have to be able to build that trust so they like you and they know you and they feel comfortable.
Yeah. And like the whole like formatting piece of it, the copywriting piece that I'm more well versed in. I'm not like creative. I'm not the most like talented with like literature in general. Like I don't have like this lovely vocabulary. It's just that I know how to format and I know how to edit so stuff is concise and clear and effective because I went to school for that, right? And that's what I'm trying to teach everybody. And I think when people start reading content like that, they want to read more of it and read more of it because they are starting to see that your content is easy to read, it's relatable, it's going to be, engaging, it's going to require engagement from them, it's going to entice them to engage with you and stuff because they know what to expect. And so if we can kind of make this shift from content that might be a bunch of run-on sentences that are hard to read and big blobs of text that aren't separated and a story that doesn't make sense or something that's hopping all over with bad grammar and no punctuation, you know what I mean? Like the worst is when like somebody's talking to text and their whole idea is like a giant sentence with no grammar or no punctuation. That like is like my worst nightmare. Like that's what it reminds me of when I read posts like that. I'm like, I can't even read this story. And then after a while, guys, your people are just going to give up because if all your content is like that, they're just like not going to read it. Yeah, it goes right over their head. Like they're going to scroll right by because they don't even know what you're saying, right? So like niching down, knowing exactly who you're talking to, exactly what you're saying, hitting their pain points, offering solutions, and then offering them in a clear, concise manner that they know exactly what you're talking about and they know exactly what their call to action is at the end. That is what you want people to expect. And you want people to know that they can count on your content and your consistency and they know exactly who you are, who you're speaking to, and hopefully you're speaking right to them and hitting on their points.
And I think when you put a name to that person or like, there's more, when you take more time on a post and you put more of your effort into it, you're going to feel more passionate about doing it. You're going to feel more passionate knowing that I am doing this to be able to help this person. Like, I'm not just putting it out there just to be my advertisement. Yes, it is your advertisement, but if you're putting a name to it, it has more value for you too. Because I know we, like you said, we can get stuck in this rut of copy and paste, but if we put a name to the post, if we put a name to who we're trying to reach and to help, we're going to put more effort into that post.
Absolutely. And I feel like people see when they they read our own style of speech, they respond to it more positively. When I write in my speaking style, I get way more engagement than if I take someone else's speaking style and try to post it as my own, because it doesn't sound like me. Even if it's words that I use all shoved together in a post, the flow of it doesn't sound like I said it. And that's why I was saying earlier, it's important to read it out loud, because they can hear your voice. Like, they can tell if it's your voice or not. They can tell if it's something that you said or not. Like Jessica, if I post anything of hers, I'd have to take out all the y'alls, because I'm not from Texas and I don't say y'all. Like, I don't do that. You know what I mean? So like people would know, like, why is Allie saying y'all? Like, what is that? Like, she's from the Pacific Northwest. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so it's important to realize that, like, yeah, it's a very normal part of speech, but like, it's not something I say all the time. And so that goes for anything, even just the way a sentence is formed. It's not going to sound like me if it's got some like flowery language that I don't use. I'm a pretty plain Jane person that doesn't use complicated vocabulary. Okay. And so I'm not going to write stuff that sounds like that. I'm not going to write stuff about working out, because I barely know how to do that. So it's like, you just kind of know like what you're doing, what you're talking about, but making it really concise and clear and impactful, and using important words and getting rid of the stuff that's not. But I love the tips that Jessica gave. And I think that I'm probably going to put this on our team page. So if you're watching this, I hope you go back and take some notes, because there might be something in it for you. Because I think this lesson was really, really good, and I'm excited for people to hear it. So do you have anything else to add, Jess? Or is that it?
I think that's last little thing. And I always hesitate to say this because I don't want to hurt feelings, but product pictures only, use them sparingly, please. Please, please, please use them sparingly. I think we've said this 5 million times, and we sound like a broken record when we say it, but people want to see your face just like they want to hear your writing. It's one and the same. I think it's okay to occasionally like be holding up with a pill, but to be standing there holding up your bottle. I think a cute water bottle with your pink drink is okay, but just people don't really want to see it, and they immediately scroll away. They want to be able to see you and hear your heart. So those kind of go one and the same, in my opinion. They want to hear your writing and they want to see your face.
Totally. You need to use your own voice and show your own face as much as you can.
Yeah.
On your feed, for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you. This is great. I'm going to post this later, and I can't wait to see what people think about it. And I guess that's all. Okay. Bye.
Bye.